Well, hello once again, and after a short break, we are back again for another Shrewsbury Town in the Community Heads Up Live. You're very, very welcome, and I'm delighted that you've decided to join us on this actually quite pleasant and sunny Saturday afternoon. Now, we will undoubtedly be talking about issues today that impact on the lives of many of you, either directly or indirectly, and we need to assure you that there is help available. And as the program goes on, there will be details on your screen. There'll be a banner coming across giving you suggestions and ideas and telephone numbers of places where you can seek help and support if you think that perhaps that will be of value to you. There is plenty of help available about all of the issues that we're going to be talking about today, some of them quite sensitive. And don't forget, those of you who've tuned in before, don't forget to use the box below your screen if you want to ask any questions, or indeed if you want to make any comments. And you can do it anonymously if you like. We always like a name if we can have a name, but you're very, very welcome to do it anonymously. Right, now our producers today are Sophie Challoner and Steve Burnside. They're doing a wonderful, wonderful job of bringing these Heads Up Live programs together. And they couldn't have done any better in their choice of guests. Our very first guest is none other than the lady who was appointed High Sheriff of Shropshire back on Friday, the 3rd of April. And she's decided to make sure every moment of every day that she's in office is going to be put to best use, focusing our hearts and minds on three, I think it is, significant areas of concern to her. So I'm delighted to welcome Dean Harris. Dean, a very, very warm welcome to you, and many congratulations on becoming High Sheriff of Shropshire.
Thanks very much, Ryan. Hello, everybody. No, I'm delighted to be here and obviously share some of my plans and thoughts for my coming year, although I'm a quarter of the way through already. I can't believe where the last sort of 12 or 14 weeks has gone, but no, thank you for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and it's the very first time I've met the High Sheriff of any county, never mind Shropshire, so it's a first for me. Now, you have three areas of concern that you're particularly anxious that you should share. It's your concern, but you think it should be our concern as well. Just tell us what they are.
Yeah, very much. Some people may be aware that I'm a magistrate in the real world as well. And based on things that I see day in, day out in the courts, I'm aware of some of the social issues that we have in the county. So I took the opportunity during my year to concentrate on domestic abuse, addiction, and child poverty and deprivation, which I know are sensitive subjects, but they are very real in Shropshire and have no doubt been made quite a lot worse by the COVID situation.
Let's have a little look at those. I think there's a slide that will show us those three areas that you are of particular concern to you. And here they come now. Let's have a little look.
Yeah, we've got that's what we've got there is actually the background to the High Sheriff.
Yeah, that wasn't the slide I was looking for, but never mind. Just tell us a little bit. Now, for somebody who's completely, it's all right, Steve, you can bring that slide back up again. For somebody who's completely ignorant about the role of High Sheriff, just tell us a little bit of background about that particular role, Dean.
Yeah, of course. And this is one of the things I want to do this year. I want to make sure people do understand a little bit more about the role so it remains relevant. So I'm officially the Queen's representative for law and order in the county. And it's an independent role that is non-political. It's by royal appointment and it's for 1 year only. And so we've put together a little bit of an infographic to make it easier to understand. So it's voluntary and we receive no remuneration. And it actually dates back 1100 years. And so back in the day, I would have been responsible. I would have been appointed by the King and I'd have been responsible for return and collection of taxes to the Crown, and also for keeping the peace in the county. So I would have raised the posses to keep the relevant counties around us out. But today it's much more a mix of charitable, ceremonial and sort of community functions, whereby we're very much responsible for supporting the judiciary, the emergency services, the voluntary sector, again, the Crown, all of the different faiths, anything to do with crime prevention, and also our local authorities. So quite a broad remit, really.
Yeah, and you were appointed on April the 3rd, of course, right in the middle of the lockdown. Just very briefly tell us, has that affected, has that impacted on your first sort of few months in office?
Uh, Very much so. I mean, as is my want, I'd done an awful lot of planning for this because I'd sort of was 3 years in the making come into the role. So I'd got my action plan. I knew what I was going to do, and obviously COVID gave that quite a sideswipe. So what I've had to do is just resort to being virtual, which I have adapted quite well. Some things simply can't happen virtually, but I've given it a good shot. So we've managed to contact well over 150 organisations. I've had web chats, I've had Zoom calls, and it's just now coming back around to recontact those organisations and see if we can actually get out and about and get involved in some of their working groups and things like that. So yeah, it was. It was unfortunate, but there are much worse things. But yeah, fortunate that I can just
Absolutely.
adapt.
Yeah, it's worth just telling you've just explained you are a magistrate, originally from South Wales and via the Black Country, and you
Yeah.
now lived in the county for well over 20 years. Just tell us, putting modesty to one side, what makes you so highly suitable to be our High Sheriff?
Well, somebody else decided on that. I can't deny that. I think it's fair to say I don't fit into what some people may consider a stereotypical high sheriff. But I'm also mindful that the association is quite keen to be more diverse and have a greater reach in the role. So I think, I come from a normal background. I'm very much an ordinary person who's been given a unique and extraordinary opportunity here. I've got a good grounding. I run my own business. And I'm familiar with some of the social issues that we've got, and I think that's extremely important. So that there's without doubt some ribbon cutting and some nice ceremonial aspects to this role, but I see it very much as something I wouldn't have taken it unless I felt I could help make some difference in the county. So that's I think they obviously saw those qualities in me, and I think I was described once as being authentic. So I'm quite happy to be that.
And I think you sense that the office empowers you to make a difference, which is the reason why you've uh, chosen three particular areas of focus, which we'll have a look at in a moment. But the office does give you a platform.
Sorry, Ryan, I didn't hear you there.
Did you, Dean? Yeah. Shall I? Can you hear me now, Dean?
I can hear you now. Sorry, I don't know whether I'm
Right.
having
Okay.
problems there.
What I'm saying is, I think you feel that the office of High Sheriff gives you a platform on which to make a difference. There's an empowerment there. You have certain things that you want to do and say and explain to people, and it's a definite platform for you.
Very much. I mean, that's I don't know. I obviously would like to put people together to make a difference over the county. I mean, it's not going to be about, I can't do everything myself. So it's very much about putting people together. But I do see it as the chance to raise the profile of these three issues, hopefully get something done about them. I mean, I've got one or two plans of what I do want to do throughout the year, but I'm aware that some people, these things don't impact on their life, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be aware that they are going on. And I know when I mentioned what the three causes were going to be many years ago, there was a sharp intake of breath from one or two areas. But if there is anything positive about COVID, these things are now, the three areas I'm concentrating on are very much being brought to the fore and being talked about a lot more than I'd ever anticipated. I know maybe for wrong reasons, but at least if they are being talked about, then they're not hidden, and we can hopefully stand a chance of doing something about them.
Three things that I know are very close to your heart that's just come up on the screen, and Steve will bring them back again in a minute. Perhaps you'd just like to talk us through that Dean, and just say a little bit of why you think these are three areas that you want to pursue.
Yeah, I'm very much. I mean, I think particularly with domestic abuse, I mean, it's there's a lot of it going on in the press at the moment, but I think it's fundamental to me that people understand and accept that it affects all communities, regardless of age, race, gender, disability, and absolutely the key ones are social and financial status. So some of the stats which people should be aware of, just to put things into perspective, are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will be affected by domestic abuse. There's over 2 million people a year affected by domestic abuse in the UK, and on average a victim will have suffered somewhere in the region of 35 incidents before they actually go to the police. And we are well aware that during COVID, all of the stats have got an awful lot worse. Domestic abuse actually counts for a quarter of all crime in the UK. And I think the thing that people tend to forget about is that at least 750,000 children in the UK will be witnessing domestic abuse, and 62% of those children will be harmed by the perpetrator as well. So, I mean, there's no excuse for domestic abuse, I'm afraid. There's no causes for domestic abuse. It's actually just excuses and possibly triggers. But I think fundamentally we need everybody to understand that it's everyone's problem and everyone's got the solution. And again, if we, as the hashtag says, if we don't all look, we won't all see. So I think it's the fact that it's borderline epidemic in the country, and that's why I think everybody needs to be aware of it and know what to do if they can spot the signs, which I know Megha's going to talk a little bit more about with you.
Wonderful.
Do you want?
Yes, go on, Dean.
No, sorry, that's on domestic abuse, and obviously we can talk a little bit more about the other two aspects later, if you like.
Yes, well, if for the moment we'll just leave it at that, because I want to introduce, as you can see there, just come up on your screen. Good afternoon, Megha Arumugam. Lovely to welcome you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Megha is our second guest this afternoon. She's currently the Domestic and Emotional Abuse Project Officer at the Citizens Advice Telford and Wrekin. The project was launched a little bit like Dean. Your project started pretty well at the beginning of the lockdown. This particular project is funded by the Telford and Wrekin Council. So welcome, Megha. And my goodness me, it took me quite a while to read your CV. You've had massive experience in this particular field. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Dean. So my journey into the domestic and sexual violence sector started back a good 14, 15 years ago, when I first started volunteering for a local domestic abuse project in Leicester, and since then it's a growing passion for me. I manage the domestic violence advocacy crisis service, as well as the outreach and the helpline for a good 7 to 8 years, and then moved on into the training arena, where I became a qualified trainer specializing in issues relating to domestic and sexual violence, but also in terms of supporting a lot of helplines across the country with regards to supporting their service users relating to issues like this. So a very varied role, very varied experiences, but all of which kind of brought me in contact with a lot of professionals who are out there, who are working so dedicatedly to help change and support a lot of victims and survivors out there. I mean, my background as a frontline practitioner brought myself face to face with a lot of survivors, families, children, all of whom have been affected by domestic abuse in a variety of ways.
And of course, the work that Dean is doing and holding her, using her office as a way of raising awareness. Is that the issue in our country, would you say, in your experience? Is it the fact that we're simply not aware, or are we just not sufficiently proactive? What do we need to do more to try and sort of improve this whole business of abusiveness in the home?
I think it's been around for a very, very long time. Like Dean mentioned, it's an endemic that's been present for a very long time. It's picked up a lot of awareness from the time when I first started working in the field, definitely. But I think at the same time, it can also be a very hidden issue, a hidden pandemic of its own kind. One of the sort of motto of the project I'm currently doing with Citizens Advice at Telford is breaking the silence. We need to continue to raise awareness. We do need to talk about it. We do need to understand the dynamics of domestic and emotional abuse. I think it's not just about asking why wouldn't someone leave an abusive relationship, but it's about understanding what goes on behind the scene that stops these victims and survivors coming out and talking about it. So I don't think it could ever go away from any agenda, political or societal. It's there, it will continue, and we just need to keep breaking those barriers down. We just need to come from all different angles to support victims to become survivors, and sort of help them out of that experience of abuse and violence.
The term domestic abuse is a fairly generic term for many different forms of abuse. I think you've got a slide there which will help us all to learn a little bit more about what it actually means, what different types of abuse we're talking about when we're having our discussion. Would you like to just talk us through it? I wonder if Steve could bring that slide up.
Yeah. So domestic abuse does manifest itself in very different forms. One of the common forms of abuse is physical and sexual abuse. Those are the forms of abuse that people relate very easily when you mention domestic abuse. But you also have the more subtle forms of abuse, such as emotional, psychological abuse, now also known as coercive control, which is a recognized crime in the UK. And then you also have the economic abuse or financial abuse, which again has become more prominent in the current agenda as COVID-19 takes over our lives as well. So, you know, it's I mean, we've kind of put it in these 4 broad categories, but there's so many different ways that domestic abuse can sort of manifest itself. And in terms of the tactics used by abusers as well can be very varied depending on each circumstance. So I think one of the things that I really want to kind of bring out is the coercive control element, which is your emotional abuse, your psychological abuse, because I think, like I said, that's very common, very powerful, but a very subtle form of abuse. It takes a long time for the victims to even recognize that they are being subjected to some form of abuse before the physical and sexual violence even starts to kick in into that relationship, into that dynamic. So it's, you know, when you talk about coercive control, is very much about how victims are subjected to control, and there's lots of undermining of the victim's perspective, transference of blame, distorting their own thought processes, isolation, again, which is very, very common, particularly much more evident during COVID-19, because it's an isolation in an isolation, so to speak. And it's about kind of like getting people to understand that. Very often people think that, you know, if a victim hasn't got a bruise, they're not subjected to domestic abuse. And I think that's the recognition we need to get out. It's like there is more to domestic abuse than just the physical and sexual violence. I'm not dismissing off that element of it, but very often it's, you know, when you talk about an abusive relationship, it starts with a psychological element, because what the abuse is trying to do is breaking down the victim as a person, and that's where the manipulation comes into play, in taking over them as an individual and making them do as how they've been told by the abuser. So coercive control is really quite important, hence why it became a criminal offense in 2015. And like the slide said, it's very much a pattern of acts, assaults, threats, humiliations, that's used to kind of frighten the victim, and it's about creating the control. Essentially, that's what entraps people in abusive behavior, and over time, as that manipulation takes over the victim's life, that's when physical and sexual violence is further used to, you know, to put things into context for the victim. So lots of harm, and even when you think about the impact it has on domestic abuse, on the victim and survivor, and we'll talk about that shortly, the damage is long lasting. There's nothing short term about domestic abuse, and as Dean mentioned, it's not, you know, it's not just an adult victim, it's also the impact on the wider family, the children, particularly now during COVID-19, when children are stuck at home, witnessing, experiencing even more abuse than they would if they were out in school.
And I suppose the important message to anybody who is in a situation on the receiving end of domestic violence, it's an awareness of what they can do about it, I suppose, and an unwillingness to tell anybody or to report the matter to anybody. Is that the big issue? Is that why perhaps we're not getting on top of it as well as we might?
I don't think it's so much an unwillingness. I think it's more the fear of being in that situation. So if we kind of equate it to our current lockdown, when you think about COVID-19 and you talk about coronavirus and the fear it puts in us in going out and getting on with the normality of life, for a victim of domestic abuse, it's almost an everyday existence. It's there, they're stuck in it, and the fear is so overwhelming that leaving isn't black and white. Asking for support isn't black and white. And there's a lot of things to it. It's like, would people understand where I'm coming from? And I think one of the things that we need to understand is someone who's been subjected to extreme forms of control and manipulation, they stop thinking for themselves. And that's where your distorted perspective comes into place. They start thinking how the abusers wants them to think. So the blame is on them, for a long period of time. This isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that happens over a period of time. It's a pattern of behavior. So over a period of time, if somebody's been told, this is your fault, or I'm only doing this because I love you, or, there's no one that's going to be believing you out there who's going to love you as much as I do. When someone's constantly told that time and time again, alongside your belittling, alongside your isolation, alongside the degradation to it, it breaks a person up so much that asking for support is a massive step forward. It's a fear of the unknown, because I think when, it's a relationship that they've come to hoping for love and all that, and all of a sudden this one person that they have truly believed, loved and cared for them has completely betrayed that trust, broken it completely. How are they going to go out and trust somebody else completely strange? So it's very.
I think also sometimes people are just, it's the absolute shame of it. I mean, bear in mind we're dealing with some of the people are in high powered jobs and they're very capable, or they've got a certain standing in the community or whatever, or in their lives, and then suddenly they're admitting that they've got this hideous situation going on at home. It's the shame of it all that they're not in control of that. So there's that side of it as well, I think, fairness.
And I think it's also the fear of the unknown, isn't it? I mean, strangely, and I it might not be the right thing to say, but they kind of almost build a comfort bubble where they've learned how to cope in that situation, and all of a sudden they need to leave that and go. And there are refuges out there, so that what will be playing in their mind is, will I be safe out there? What's going to happen? And like Dean said, there is also the shame, the stigma, the who's going to believe me notion of it.
It might get worse. Yeah, the thought that the bullying become worse as a result of them reporting it.
Yes.
I should think it's a big issue.
Oh no, of course. I mean, domestic abuse doesn't stop as soon as someone leaves the relationship. If anything, it tends to escalate, and we've seen that from domestic abuse homicides as well. So leaving isn't black and white, but at the same time, it's important for people to recognize that there is support out there. There are professionals specially trained to work with you to help you leave the relationship in as a safe possible way as possible. And having worked in the field, we would never tell someone to leave unless we are, absolutely in fear for their life and safety. We always talk through with them. We do safety planning, and we kind of work with them to see, because they are the expert of the situation. I'm not, professionals aren't. Only they know what's happening in the background. So it's about kind of helping them to understand what's out there and how they can access those different support and what support is available out there. I mean, if you're thinking in times of COVID-19, some of the things that might be going in people's mind is, how do I ring a helpline when I don't have privacy or time to myself? The house is full of children, the abuser, they're all stuck in lockdown. The question is, our refuges are even open? Are services open? Obviously, over the lockdown, we've had very limited services out there, whether it's medical, health, emergency services. So that there is that constant thought of, who do I speak to, and who's going to support me through that process. One of the things that we have also found during COVID-19 particularly is abusers using the virus as an excuse, and saying, oh, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to get the virus, I'm going to come back and I'm going to give it to you, or you're going to go out there, you're going to, or you deserve to get the virus. So there's a lot of that kind of manipulation going on as well, particularly in the present time. So there's additional fear being added to that victim's situation. So I think it's not so much an unwillingness, but I think it's more, how do I go about doing this without further putting myself at risk or putting my children at further risk? So it's about thinking about what resources are out there, and it's amazing amount of resources out there. There is a lot of support out there. It's it's about people knowing where to go to, not just the victims and survivors themselves, but I think professionals. And I think this kind of sessions and series are so important because you're reaching out to more people. You're telling people out there is this helpline number, please ring it. People will, you'll be spoken to in confidence about it. There's support out there for people who are worried about their own behavior, where they're feeling isolated, stressed out, and feel that they're becoming abusive. There is also a project out there which I'll mention later on. So support is coming in very different shapes to help victims and survivors of domestic abuse.
And what if we're a friend or a relative, a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, or just a third party who becomes aware that there may be possible abuse going on in a particular home? Do we have a responsibility ourselves to do something about it, to pick up the phone or to speak, or what would be your help and guidance on that particular front?
Please pick up the phone and speak to somebody. So, it might be a case where the organization that you're ringing might say, we need to speak to that person directly so that we know the situation and we can advise them. But that doesn't stop a third party, a family or friend, to ring and say, this is what, this is what's happening. I'm concerned. One of the common questions they ask is this abuse? I don't know if this is abuse. Is this abuse? So sometimes just talking that out with a professional, with a support organization, helps them to understand the sort of the danger or the situation that their loved one is in, and to know how to manage it, because you do want to manage the situation as sensitively and as carefully as possible. You want to help your loved one out of that situation without putting additional pressure on them as well to leave. So it's about but please do ring. There is lots of number there. The slide shows all the different numbers there locally, West Mercia Women's Aid and Shropshire Domestic Services, but also you have a 24-hour National Domestic Abuse helpline as well that can help. Do call. Do have a conversation about it. If you go onto the Citizens Advice Telford and Wrekin website, the Domestic Abuse Project, there is a Get Help section there, which again highlights what are the things that you can do to help someone that you are concerned about as well. But the key thing is, do ring, and don't try to mull over it in your own head. Pick up the phone, speak to someone, raise your concern, and report it, or just talk to someone about it.
I mean, the other thing to remember is, obviously we're talking about male, female, same sex. The provision covers all of those provisions. Can help whichever area we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's an important fact to mention. Although predominantly it affects females as victims and males as the perpetrators equally, I think COVID-19 has had an impact on all victims of domestic abuse. And one thing I always say is domestic abuse doesn't discriminate against its victims. Anyone can be subject to domestic abuse. So quite rightly, like Dean highlighted there, even from March to May this year, if you think about statistics, Men Advice Line had experienced 100% increase in access to their support services. So, it's about anyone and everyone. If you feel that you are in a controlling relationship, something doesn't feel right or healthy about that relationship, if you feel that you are under control, or you feel isolated, or just, somewhat, if you feel like you're suffocating in that relationship, please pick up the phone and speak to someone.
Megha, that was absolutely amazing. For the moment, thank you very much indeed, because we've just focused so far on Dean's very first area of concern. Let's have a little chat with Dean again about your other two areas that you want us to raise awareness of, Dean, and we can go back to the slide and just remind ourselves of what they are, perhaps, Steve.
The next area I wanted to cover off with everybody is addiction, and I'm specifically focusing on alcohol and drugs. And just so that we've got some stats on that, in Shropshire, it's reckoned there are about 5,000 people who are classed as alcohol dependent and so in need of special treatment. But actually, only 20% of those will be able to access funding, and that's due to financial reasons and lack of provision in the county. And I think when you think that the cost of alcohol-related harm to society, they reckon, is about £21 billion a year in the UK, and that's through crime, loss of productivity in the NHS. So you can see the significance of that. And I think we need to remember that alcoholism is the third largest killer in the world, behind cancer and heart disease. So we've got a lot of work to do there. And we've also got to address the issue of stigma. So people feeling comfortable reaching out when they feel they've got a problem and that being taken seriously. And then if we look at drugs, it's about between 9 and 10% of adults in the last year have taken illicit drugs. And unfortunately, that rises to 20% in the 16 to 24-year-old age group. And I think what we need to realise as a society is simply investing in drug and alcohol treatment actually cuts crime, saves money, and leads to better public health outcomes. So, I mean, for every £1 spent on drug treatment, it saves £2.50 to society. So we seriously need to rethink how we're dealing with these things, really. And then thirdly, and in some ways the most difficult area to penetrate, to make a difference to, is the child poverty and deprivation. But I think when people appreciate that, I mean, to a lot of people, Shropshire is very affluent and posh, but we really do have some deprived areas, and actually some of them are in the top 10% nationally. So a third of all children living in Shropshire at the moment are living in poverty. And across the two areas, that's 39% in Telford and Wrekin and 29% in the Shropshire council area. So, and sadly, 70% of those will actually have one parent who is working, but 50% of all lone parent families will be living in poverty in the county as well.
I can't imagine that COVID has helped this particular situation. And with the prospect of some high unemployment figures being published, I think next week sometime, I can't see the situation getting better very early on.
Definitely not. I mean, I think, like you say, I mean, we've all seen, because we're not just talking, when we talk poverty, we're not just talking about food poverty, because we're all familiar with the increase in food banks and the usage of food banks, and people who never would have ever set foot in a food bank previously now actually needing the services. And I think, you know, we've got a whole issue to deal with once the furloughing scheme stops and some furloughed employees, it turns to redundancies. I think we've got a tricky time ahead, and that's an understatement. But yes, there's no denying there's food poverty, but it goes wider than that. And it's just the fact that the children and youngsters living in this with this issue just don't have the same levels of opportunity, and that's what we've got to do something about.
I noticed on some of your notes that you were showing me something called ACEs. Just talk us through what part of your project is the ACEs.
Well, this is linking to the child poverty and deprivation. And for those people who aren't familiar with ACEs, they are adverse childhood experiences, and they are traumatic experiences that a child will incur before the age of 18. And there's generally three areas of ACEs, and they are household dysfunction, and that includes drug abuse, alcohol abuse and mental health issues, domestic abuse, criminal behaviour, and even parental separation. The second area then is abuse itself, which is psychological, physical and sexual. And then the third one is neglect, which can obviously be emotional or physical. There are other adversities that children can suffer, which are things like bereavement, bullying, but also the fact of living in a deprived and violent area. And the top and bottom of it is, the more ACEs a child experiences, then the greater risk of negative outcomes in adulthood. So they will go on and suffer from poor physical and mental health, substance abuse, perpetrating domestic abuse, promiscuous behaviour, criminal behaviour, and even early death. So you will hear people quite often talk about the toxic trio, which is substance misuse, domestic abuse, and mental health issues. And I think what the thing I'm trying to highlight in my year is to improve young lives, we've got to address ACEs. And what we've got to do is focus on not the consequences of ACEs, but we've got to invest in ACE prevention. So getting in early and supporting and helping families and individuals who have got issues, not waiting to see those manifest themselves in adult lives for these people. So I'm very much prevention's better than cure. So we've got some ideas for some programs possibly to take into the schools once they're back in school.
Absolutely. Well, my question was going to be, you're about a third of your way through your term of office. I'm just wondering how you're going to carry your projects forward for the rest of the year.
Well, I mean, I've got quite a few things I do want to do, and I can't deny I did set myself a bit of a tall order, but that's just typical of me, really. So I've got legal duties and things like that I'll carry on and do. And obviously I've already started bringing different organisations together to make a difference, which has been quite rewarding. I want to raise the profile of some of the good stuff going on in the county, and we are fortunate that there is a lot of good stuff. And that was pre-COVID as well. There's a lot of people doing a lot of good things out there. I want to do some fundraising, and that's working with ACO in Oswestry, who are supporting me with corporate social responsibility funding, which is really generous of them. We're trying to raise the profile of the High Sheriff, as I already said. And to coin a phrase, I'd like to sprinkle some of my Shropshire stardust. So that's quite important. But specific events and projects that we've actually got underway already is that we're going to be hosting some employer events in October. They'll obviously now be virtual events. And that's working with the Chamber of Commerce to educate employers on domestic abuse, so they can recognise the signs and comfortably know what to do about it. Because I appreciate it, as Megha said, it's a sensitive area, and you need to be comfortable if you're going to step in and try and help somebody. So those are underway. I want to work with organisations to try and encourage them to become white ribbon accredited, and what that is whereby organisations show a commitment, and it's specifically to end in male violence against women. But we do it through engaging with men and boys so that they are championing that message as well. So that's something that's quite important to me. And I've been encouraging some of the public bodies and some of our town councils to hopefully go for that accreditation. We've got an initiative going, working with lots of the service providers across the county, and that includes Shrewsbury Town in the community, which is World Homelessness Day. We want to do a week-long series of events leading up to that in October. Which again will highlight the issues of homelessness and rough sleeping, because they're not one and the same across the county, and hopefully try and help eradicate is probably a tall order, but certainly get rid of some of the misconceptions of that and see if we can get some action going across the county there. What else do I want to do? I want to engage with schools to try and raise the aspirations of some of the children.
We can't say you're unambitious, Dean, that's for sure.
I know. And a couple of the other things I want to do, so again, back to my preventative message, see if we can get a programme off the ground where we are teaching children, actually even in primary school, about domestic abuse in a sensitive way, I appreciate, but so that they are familiar with what's right and what's wrong. So that's quite important. So yes, those are the lists so far.
Wonderful. And just if those of us who want to sort of keep abreast of where you are and what you're doing, can we do that? Have you got a website or a project site? Where can we keep up to date with you?
Yep, very much. We've got a website, which is www.highsheriffofshropshire.co.uk. I'm on Facebook, which is, again, High Sheriff of Shropshire. I'm on Instagram, High Sheriff Shropshire. And I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Dean Harris. I have got a Twitter account, but I am staying away from that because I could get myself into trouble doing tweeting unnecessarily. So, no, I'm not doing that. And one other thing I do want to do is I want to... the High Sheriff Awards, I'm quite keen on getting those. We launched them earlier this month. They run through all the way to January, and that's to recognise some of the unsung heroes in the county. Not necessarily anything to do with COVID, but just somebody who makes a difference or an organisation that makes a difference. Get nominated them, and that's quite simple. Just go to the the website, as I said, and there's a simple nomination form to fill in. So I wanted to launch them early to give sort of maximum time for people to apply. So yeah, those will end in January, and then we'll be presenting in March.
I told you time would go very quickly, and it certainly has gone very, very quickly. If I could just bring Sophie in, and well, Megha's going to join us as well, and Sophie, if she's there. Sophie, can you just explain to everybody how they can download some really, really helpful material?
Yeah, not a problem. So, but first of all, thank you so much to our guests, Dean and Megha. Really appreciate that professional perspective and hearing your agenda that you want to drive home this year. It sounds like you're going to make a huge difference in the county, so well done. We're free to get in touch if you need anything after this. If you're a viewer and want to just ask a question or know where to find resources, do feel free to get in touch to us. There will be a downloadable resource for you after this on our website so that you are able to self-access. But again, if you just want that extra bit of support, that is not a problem. Just get in touch with us.
And did you want to do something on mindset for us?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch on that sort of act of solidarity that we're all sort of going through this COVID experience together, and this is our sort of hot topic at the moment for us. I know we're touching on domestic abuse today, but it's about us looking out for each other as a county, as a community, and spotting those signs and symptoms. If you are concerned about somebody in your community, whether a neighbour, a friend, a family member, you really do have to speak up and go and get those resources and just make that phone call, because you could be the difference between them becoming a statistic and being a survivor. So please do get in touch with the right people at the right time.
Definitely. I think just to add to that, it's about validating their experiences and not normalizing it. I think that's absolutely key. And also, I think it's about empowering them. So even if they don't feel that they can access support, by you doing it, you're helping them to access that support. So, you know, it's not just about not doing anything about it. Just pick up the phone and speak to someone about it if in the slightest doubt.
Yeah, and I know that at this time our stress levels might be through the roof than what they normally would be, and we totally understand that. And if you do find yourself becoming that person that you wouldn't normally be and having those high levels of stress, frustration or anger, maybe try some basic things. When you're getting up in the morning, you set yourself 3 acts of gratitude and you say thank you for everything that's good in your life. And hopefully that positive perspective might give you a really good outlook for the rest of the day. And if you chose one thing about everybody in your household that you're grateful for, then maybe that frustration and that anger might not be so much throughout the day. Yeah. So really take it upon yourself to better yourself through a very stressful time.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think one thing as well, particularly as you mentioned, Sophie, being under pressure, starting to feel really worried about how you're reacting to that pressure and stress. And things are getting out of hand. There's an organization called White Ribbon, and they have developed during the COVID-19, they've developed a toolkit for those who are feeling under pressure and how they can manage that. So what I could do is probably forward that to you to put up on your website as well. So there's the added resource there, just in terms of things you can think about, how you manage your stress, because abuse is no excuse.
Yes, exactly. Take ownership is the main name of the game. Yes.
Well, can I just say, sorry, Sophie, have you finished?
I was just saying,
Sophie usually,
you go ahead.
Yes, Sophie usually has the last word. Can I just say though, to you, Dean, and to you, Megha, that I really enjoyed that session. I thought I knew quite a lot. I realised I know very, very little, and I'm going to suggest to Sophie that perhaps it'd be worthwhile considering getting you both back sometime in the near future and rehearsing some of the things that we've said, because the message that you are giving everybody, giving me and giving a lot of people, is a message well worth hearing. So thank you very much indeed, Megha, for your contribution today. To you, Dean, because you've stirred us up, you've got this going, and that is exactly what you intended would happen. And I think that's really important. And well done on becoming High Sheriff. I hope it's a wonderful, wonderful year. I hope you can get out there a little bit more than you've been able to. Once again, Sophie, thank you to you for bringing the whole thing together. And it
Pleasure.
just leaves me to say to the ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls out there who might be listening either now or in the future, thank you for joining us, and we hope we'll see you soon. So for that, farewell, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.